Closed captioning for Lakeland Currents is supported by the Minnesota Department of Commerce, Telecommunications Access Minnesota, and Nisswa Tax Service. Nisswa Tax Service, tax preparation for businesses and individuals. Across from City Hall in Nisswa and online at nisswatax.com.
There probably isn't anything more interesting in Minnesota than our wildlife. And whenever we do shows about wildlife, it seems like we have a lot of comments and a lot of interest in what the particular shows are. And tonight we have a guest, Peggy Callahan, who is the Executive Director of the National Wildlife Science Center in Forest Lake, Minnesota. And she is here to talk about a number of things, wolves being one of them, but a number of things and what the Science Center does, and I think you're going to find this program very interesting. Peggy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having us.
And maybe you could introduce part of your guest.
Absolutely. I said us because I brought my McLean German Shepherd, who is very frequently mistaken for a wolf, and he sort of underscores some of what we try to do in terms of education, just sort of what do they look like. The further south you go, the less familiar you are with what wolves really look like.
And he is a beautiful animal, and you guessed it, or you know exactly what he weighs, which
is
he's
about 135 pounds.
And how would that compare to a nice male wolf?
We don't have wolves that weigh 135 pounds in Minnesota. The record is 118, and that was an animal that was hit by a car with a full stomach. So
really?
We really, yes, they don't range that large in Minnesota, although their body size, their legs, their heads, their jaws are dramatically larger because for thousands of years, a dog like McLean has not had the job of killing prey for a living. We've been taking care of that. So they can afford to get large and bulky and ineffective.
So tell us about the National Wildlife Science Center. I know I ran across you at the State Fair. Right. And I have heard of the National Wildlife Science Center, but I have never been there before, and I'm sure a lot of our viewers haven't. So tell us about who you are and what you do.
Well, the Wildlife Science Center was actually founded as a federal project, and it was really just a question mark. Much of what we know about wildlife has been from from free-ranging research, but some things you just can't answer by studying animals in the field. You can't control things like the variables that really confound our ability to learn. Gender, age, you know, gosh, if I knew I could always catch healthy adults, then maybe I could learn something about the species. But these things are not possible when you're studying wild animals in the wild. So some very talented scientists established a research colony in 1976 to ask the question, why is there only one female in a social group of wolves in Minnesota in the Central Great Lakes that has puppies? I mean, what's the mechanism? And so they used wolves that were eating from the do not eat list. And we certainly are all familiar with the fact that wolves don't always obey our laws. And so, but the act of bringing those animals into captivity confounded their ability to answer the question. And this colony became the place that anyone that was going to go into the wild and study wolves learned there first, learned how do you anesthetize them, how do you put a radio collar, where do you take blood without shaving a leg like you would in a vet clinic. I mean, there's so many questions that seem very basic, but had not been asked. They're different than dogs, very different, and yet the same family. So many of these things that were new to scientists were asked at this colony. So it ran from 1976 to 1990 as a federal research facility. I started there in 1985 with a biology degree, undergraduate biology degree, fully fitted with my rose-colored glasses about wolves, what wolves were about. I'm from southern Minnesota and didn't really understand what a complicated predator this animal is. And loved my first 5.5 years as a federal biologist. I got to go to Isle Royale and capture wolves. And then at the end of 1990, my boss, who was the late Dr. Ulysses Seal, an amazing guy, he retired from his federal position, and with him went the funding. So there was a small group of us, some great biologists, that chose to continue this as an education center close to the metro area. And I think we have a different story to tell in the metro area. I think we're very pragmatic folks. We're hunters, we're outdoorsmen, we're biologists, we're conservationists. So it's not another case of Walt Disney in the metro, and we're pretty excited about that.
And what other animals does your research center look at?
Well, we actually are interested in two things in terms of what species we actually will accept. And I'll be honest with you, Ray, if we wanted to take anything that was surrendered or abused or neglected in terms of wildlife, wildlife is the #2 illegal trafficking commodity, second to drugs.
Really?
So, yes. So unfortunately, I could have everything from tigers to any kind of primate. But we are interested in native species. We're interested in conflict resolution between humans and animals because we're going to have to deal with that. You know, the more wildlife recovers, conflict resolution is going to be there. We're also interested in education, science education, exciting kids about being outdoors. So that kind of forms the basis for what animals we accept. So with that said, we have fox and coyote and the cats that are native to Minnesota. We have mountain lion, which mountain lion, cougar, and puma are all the same cat. We have lynx, we have bobcats. So it's pretty fun to do that. Red fox and gray fox, by the way. So I'm going to have a couple of these guys here along. A gray fox is a pretty homogeneous guy. He doesn't vary in color, but people get a little thrown off because they have so much red around their ears, and so they sometimes get confused for red fox, but these are not. They always have this lovely black stripe down their tail and a black tip.
And they are tree climbers, aren't they?
They are tree climbers, which is really neat.
A lot of people don't realize that.
That's right.
Yeah.
The cat-like canid, they not only climb trees, but that's where they den. They den in trees.
Do they hunt in trees? Will they go after squirrels or
you know,
not so
they
much?
will. These guys have all kinds of substrate to hunt in, which is neat. But most of the time, they're terrestrial hunters. So neat guys. I mean, their claws don't pull back like a cat does into their foot, but what a neat. Their pupils are vertical slits like cats.
Really?
Yeah. So they're, you know, where are they from? Neat little guy. And the red fox is also a neat critter. We have a red fox here. Red fox come in lots of different outfits. They are not just red. They have that characteristic white tip to their tail, but they can be black or silver. They can be what's called a cross fox, which is named for the cross across their shoulders. They can be blonde, but they're all a red fox with just a different jacket on. So they're pretty neat. So we have red fox, and we actually also have skunk, which is really fun. Love having skunk, although I will confess that our veterinarian has rendered them unable to do to the school children that visit us what the skunks fantasize about doing.
Oh.
And they do.
Now, most of these animals, we might add, are probably, most of them have passed away, haven't they, on your facility?
These guys, either that or we have been gifted. We are very fortunate. We're supported by the Minnesota Trappers Association. They've been wonderful to us in terms of contributing to our education program. This is an otter. Otters are very carefully regulated in terms of harvest and in terms of what happens to the remains in Minnesota. And this was donated by the Minnesota Trappers Association, which is, we're very, very grateful. So some of these animals are roadkills, so it depends. But the wolf in particular was an animal that he has an interesting history, and I'll talk
I know
about
you do have a wolf hide.
We have a wolf
Did you want
hide
to get
also.
back to that a little bit later?
Yeah, right.
Yep. And so you have tours. Students can
Absolutely.
come, or adults can
Absolutely.
come and tour your facility.
Right.
How many acres are involved?
We are actually very fortunate because of our history to be tenants of the Department of Natural Resources. We rent land right now from Carlos Avery Wildlife
okay.
Management Area. We eventually will be moving off of that land. We did buy our own property, but for right now they've been wonderful hosts, and it's a wonderful partnership. So, but we have tours. It's not a drop-in center. You do have to arrange to be there.
And there are fees, as I understand, because you have to
Right,
generate
but they're
your own
nominal.
revenue.
They're nominal. We feel it's very important for families to be able to experience this kind of thing. So, but we also have festivals and fun events through the year that sort of hide education in fun events. And our staff we have 2 important educators that are licensed science teachers. So our programs, our primary audience are K through 12, through schools, through charter schools, through home schools, through all kinds of things. We also work with secondary and post-secondary learning a tremendous amount. We have colleges and graduate schools that come all the time. We have graduate students. We have Eagle Scouts. Bless the Scouts, the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts are such huge helps to us. They have been wonderful in partnering with us and completing their projects. And they're fun projects. One of our fun ones that was recent, they built a double deck for a group of 5 bears to get up off the ground. Bears are always very inquisitive, and we have a group of 5 bears, and the minute those scouts left the enclosure, the bears climbed up, and one of them stood up as though he was, nice job, Scouts. So it was a really neat thing.
Well, let's talk just briefly about, you do have an event coming up here on January 29th. It's called the Winter Festival. Could you tell us just a little bit about what that is?
I really believe in getting folks outside. I really, really do. And what always amazes me is that here we are living in Minnesota, and it's cold from the end of October until May, and we somehow don't plan around getting outdoors. So one of the things that gets folks outdoors is the chance to be around animals. And animals are magnetic from the time you're a baby all the way through your adult life. And so we partnered with dog sledding organizations. Sled dogs are oftentimes mistaken for being part wolf or close to wolf, and that's simply not accurate. But what a great way to get folks' attention is to have these charismatic, exciting dogs at our facility. You get a chance to come out. These mushers, which is the term for these folks that run these teams, are willing to teach you. I learned to mush, and frankly, I mush behind shepherds because I'm lazy. If I fall off the sled, they're a herding dog. They come back for me, and I love that. So they teach you how to skidjor in a city park or mush out in the wilderness, and they show you the equipment. We have equipment available from vendors, and you can ride on a dog sled, which is really fun. So.
And I see for adults it's only $6, and for children it's only $4, so it's very, very reasonable.
Very reasonable.
Again, that's on January 29th from 11 in the morning till 4:30 in the afternoon.
That's right.
Well, your specialty certainly is wolves. And I see our Senator Klobuchar has been actually actively involved in getting the wolf delisted. Very controversial, very political, not only in Minnesota, but in almost every state that has a wolf population. They take a bad rap in many cases, don't they? I mean, I think a lot of deer hunters are claiming that they're thinning out the deer herd. Landowners who have calves or sheep, and I'm sure there are times when they are affected by these. As a researcher, what can you tell us about this whole process, and where do you think it's going to go? Are they going to have delisting in Minnesota? Do you see hunting of wolves coming down the pike?
You just threw a whole pile of stuff at me here, Ray. And this is a 3-hour conversation, but let me pick it apart just a little bit. The first thing I would like to say is that I think Minnesota should be very proud of the fact that we have the first really recovered wolf population in the lower 48 states, and I'm talking biologically recovered. There was a very talented group of folks that gathered long ago and decided how many animals needed to be present to, and the language is, under the Endangered Species Act, ensure the continued survival of the wolf in Minnesota. That does not mean that wolves need to be everywhere. It isn't appropriate for certain animals to be anywhere. And those of us some folks live in the city, they know raccoons belong only certain places, rats only belong certain places. That's true of wolves, bears, bobcats, eagles, etc. So we really need to figure out habitat versus where they're appropriate and where they're not. So that's my first comment is it's exciting to have them recovered biologically. The politics surrounding wolves have been astounding to me. They are not an animal that's dealt with in a scientific manner in the public debate. So what happens is that the Endangered Species Act is, I think, on the line here because there are folks that are so emotional about wolves that feel as though wolves need to be protected in perpetuity, and folks that just want them, that feel as though scientifically they should be part of the state management plan. And unfortunately, there isn't a scientific debate that's happening. It's emotional. The truth is, wolves do eat livestock. They do eat dogs. Probably not as much as some folks think, and more often than other folks think. The comfort we can take in Minnesota is that we have, since the 70s, had a very solid group of folks running that program that are scientists, that are experienced. They're not vulnerable to this kind of influence. The U.S. Department of Agriculture has a branch called Wildlife Services that responds to these complaints. Those folks go to the farm, to the pet owner, to whatever happens, and and probably get beaten on by everyone. But they are pragmatic, and there's no evidence to suggest they're anything other than reasonable. They go, they identify, they take the science in, and here is the law, and here's my response, including what if the owner of the animal is, and blame is the wrong term, but somehow contributing to the issue, and that happens. Leaving a carcass pile, having an unfenced dog. I live in wolf country, and I have lost a dog to wolves because she was outside of my fence. So that was my responsibility. I didn't want to face that, and I still don't want to, but that's one of those pieces that they give us. So yes, they impact animals, but there are numbers out there. We know those numbers. The USDA has those numbers. They have nothing to gain or lose by changing those numbers, and then they respond by controlling those wolves. They will capture and euthanize those wolves, and that has worked well for us here in the state of Minnesota. So that piece, I think we needn't be alarmist. I am also a deer hunter, Ray, so I understand, and I hunt in Hinckley, and what that has meant is that my hunt is different than the property that I run down in Linwood, where I run a youth bow hunt, where the kids can be loud and late, and the deer are not alarmed by the signs or smells of predators. We have captive wolves there, and the deer don't care. So you hunt a different animal when you hunt in wolf country, and that changes our hunt. Does it affect deer behavior? Absolutely. Does it affect deer numbers? Certainly locally, but the Department of Natural Resources has wonderful data to say, good news, deer hunters, you're going to have to be better at it. You're going to have to be sophisticated. It isn't going to eliminate your opportunity to take deer here in the state in any way. It may change it, and we can't control climate. We can't control weather. Deep snows, snow conditions affect our hunt. I had a lousy hunt this year. We had all kinds of weird weather. I'm a duck hunter in particular, and so I think probably duck hunters are going to understand my lament with the last two years where we haven't had a quality duck season here in Minnesota. So,
what are the numbers of wolves that we're looking at in Minnesota, and how does that compare to what maybe we think were historical highs before mankind became a factor in the habitat?
Well, the numbers and the Department of Natural Resources does a very good estimate. So the estimate is around 3,000 wolves or so. And it doesn't seem to have increased dramatically because we've had some stabilization in the deer population as well, some harsh winters, and other factors that influence wolf populations. Probably historically, when it comes to wolf saturation, we have a completely new Minnesota anyway. We don't have bison anymore. We don't have elk. We don't have woodland caribou. Those are all gone. So we have more bears. We have more wolves. Deer never moved up to the North Shore until after 1900. So we have a completely new Minnesota. So to compare it to history, there isn't a comparison. This is new. And ecologically, it's new. Politically, it's new. And we have deer densities that are unprecedented. So the wolves are saying, awesome. These are easier to catch than woodland caribou. They're easier to catch than bison. We can live in higher densities, but we don't like your farmlands. We don't like your open, we don't like the removal of forest cover. We don't like the road densities. So they're pocketed in different ways, and that appears to be very important. The vegetative cover, the human densities, human activities, although they're much more tolerant of our activities than we had never ever imagined they would be. They are still not existing in the kinds of densities that their prey population suggests they could be, probably in response to us.
How about disease? I mean, I know there are sometimes young litters that are getting hit by certain kind of diseases. controlling the numbers somewhat, or is it affecting the numbers positively or negatively?
There's no question that disease is affecting the numbers. There's no question. And parvovirus, which is the big bad guy, is no doubt affecting puppy numbers. And that's a disease that if you're a dog owner, you panic about until your puppy gets through all of his or her puppy shots. That is an intestinal virus that actually was created in a laboratory and escaped sometime in the 70s and has been deleterious to canid populations since, including actually pinnipeds, the seals, the sea lions, et cetera. So it's a
really
terrible virus. And young animals have a very difficult time surviving it. So yes, is it terrible to puppies? It's terrible to puppies. Adults can survive and can pass that immunity on. But that was the big bad guy on Isle Royal that took the population in 1980 from 50 down to 12 or 11 animals in 84. Somebody brought their dog to the island illegally, and now it's made it to Yellowstone National Park. So we have parvo in Yellowstone. We certainly have parvo in Minnesota. It's a bad guy. It's definitely out there. But we have mange, and mange is something that is communicated from animal to animal. It's a tiny little bug that bites their skin, but in a highly social animal. That's communicated from animal to animal very readily. And when the secondary cause is fur loss. Can you imagine being furless in this climate?
Yeah.
Especially this weekend upcoming. So,
yeah. Well, I don't know if you want to talk anymore about wolves, because I know we don't have a whole lot of time, but it's going fast. We're down to about 8 minutes already.
no.
But cougars are an animal that are getting a lot more interest in central Minnesota. I'm personally a person who has seen a couple now myself, so they're around. I know a DNR gets a lot of reports of cougars that turn out to be bobcats and other things. But what kind of research have you done on cougars?
We haven't done any yet, and that's actually why we're actually slowly accumulating cougars, is because there's a lot of interest in some of my colleagues in looking at conflict prevention. But a comment about cougars, and that is that we definitely know there are wild cougars in Minnesota. They have suffered the same fate that many predators did, and the government extirpated them. This is a government-funded thing to wipe out wolves and bears and cougars, not hunting. We haven't hunted these animals historically in Minnesota, so they were extirpated. They're recovering slowly. They're solitary, so we're not seeing the packs like we would with wolves. The other problem is that it's legal to own them as humans.
Which is strange, isn't it?
Strange, but there are at least 1,000 that are registered as pet cougars in Minnesota.
1,000 cougars?
Yes. So if we know that as pets, and if you lose your lab out of your backyard, nobody judges you. But what if you lose your cougar? I mean, that's, and I'm not going to report it because of the certainly repercussions if I'm a pet owner. So we've got that to deal with, and we certainly have had cases of cats ending up in strange places and then eventually the owner confessing, yes, that was my cat.
Wow. That's why it's so often it's said that, is this a pet?
Exactly.
They don't know.
That's the question mark.
That's a phenomenal number, isn't it? 1,000?
It's horrifying. It's horrifying.
Yeah.
And I think, why would any government entity think they needed to regulate that? Who in the world would? I have enough challenges owning a 135-pound German Shepherd. Why would you need to own a cougar? So we struggle with that issue as well. So but they are here. We know there are radio-collared cats in the Dakotas that are moving into Minnesota, that have moved through Minnesota, gone to Canada, gone through Wisconsin.
Really?
So we know they're there. Yes, absolutely.
They're covering that big of a territory.
Yes.
Wow.
Well, and if you're dispersing from your parents, which is what adult predators do, they don't hang out together in love and harmony. Mom kicked me out because I'm going to compete for deer. They search for whatever variables go into their real estate search. I don't know what it is, and none of us really understand it fully.
Wow.
So
interesting. Well, tell us about bears. What kind of work do you do with bears?
We have done a lot of work with bears. Most of the work we've done has been testing anesthetics and looking at aversive conditioning. Can we keep bears away from food supplies? Bears are in trouble all the time, eating out of bird feeders, eating crops, etc. We work with a number of graduate students. We work with professors. We have a wonderful relationship with the DNR with respect to bear research. And our bears serve as models for looking at what can we identify in our bears that can either, yep, you're a conflict bear, you're a bear that visits human food sources all the time, or you're not. So they're very hard on beehives, as you can imagine, and the other variables, of course, are impacting beehives as well. So it's an interesting relationship, but we really have enjoyed working. We have 9 black bears at our center.
I was going to say, how many different or how many total animals do you have in your center?
100.
Roughly 100. Mm-hmm. And you have birds too, right?
We do have raptors. We have raptors. Those are all permanently injured birds, so those are pretty much strictly for education purposes. But our other animals serve as training. We train wildlife biologists from literally all over the world. We've had biologists from Japan, we've had biologists from Argentina, from Canada, from everywhere, coming to learn, how do I actually handle this thing in the wild, put a radio collar on it and let it go and have it return to be a functional cougar, bear, wolf.
Wow. Are bears impacted much by disease?
Bears are very rarely impacted by disease. They are impacted by humans. Almost exclusively. There is bear-to-bear conflict. There is very little disease, but there sometimes food supplies, depending on how wet or dry. Dry years are very hard on them. They're dependent on things called the mast crop, the acorn crop, the berry crop, etc. But really, we're the bad guys for bears. So they're really not. They're amazing. In fact, I grew up. My father's a physician at the Mayo Clinic, and the Mayo Clinic looked at bears as models for human medicine. If we had their kidneys, we would not need dialysis. If we had their lungs, we could lie still and not get pneumonias. If we had their bone densities, we could recover from injuries in a longer time. I mean, it's just, they're really remarkable. And now I know that the DNR is working closely with the Mayo Clinic looking at their amazing cardiac function. So these animals are remarkable at adaptation.
We aren't even getting half through our discussion and we are out of
No,
time.
I'm sorry.
It's very, very fascinating. Again, it's the National Wildlife Science Center and it's located in Forest Lake. And you do have a season, don't you? Are you open year-round?
Year-round. Animals in the winter are exciting. Okay. Very exciting.
And you have a website that people can go to?
Absolutely.
And I think we'll have that posted on our show.
Fantastic.
Peggy, thank you very much for appearing on Lakeland Currents. We appreciate it very much. It sounds like a fascinating place, and I'm going to come down and visit it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ray. Thanks for having us.
You bet. You've been watching Lakeland Currents, where we're talking about what you're talking about. I'm Ray Gildow. So long until next time. Thank you. They went fast, didn't they?
I did. I'm sorry. I forgot to look at the screen for